Today's topic is character bows and character bow layout. So this bow that you see here is an elm character bow. You can see on this upper limb it has this wavy snake-like pattern, and it does not have that wavy snake-like pattern on the bottom limb. There's a little bit of wave to it, but not anything near the amount that's on this limb. And also this bow has something that's called propeller twist, and that is where one limb angles off this way, the other limb angles off this way. And that can be very problematic if you don't have your stave laid out properly, you don't know how to work with that. So to start off with, the things that are most important about a bow, this limb could literally be bent like this. I've made bows that are like this. I had one made from yew that lasted me a good long time, and it was tillered really well. I just shot it in the wrong conditions and it broke. As long as you have 3 points that match up, this tip and the handle and that tip have to be in a line, or you can even set it up to where, in this instance, you can see the string is directly over the arrow pass. So this bow is in essence a center shot bow, even though it doesn't have some of these complicated gadgets that you see in like a modern compound. And what that does is, I'm told, that takes the draw force line of when you're pulling the bow back and places it directly behind the arrow, so that you don't have to worry about the archer's paradox, which is where the arrow has to bend around the bow and compensate, and you get a straight pass kind of regardless of the weight of the arrow that you're shooting. So you don't have to worry so much about whether the particular arrow you have matches the weight of the bow. So I'm told, and that's been my experience shooting these, is that these bows that I have that are laid out this way have a tendency to be much, much easier to shoot when I have a collection of arrows that maybe are a little bit mismatched. For example, I have this primitive arrow here and this primitive arrow here. They're both very different. It's very hard to get matched primitive arrows that you've made specifically from, say, viburnum shafts like these. Now when you're doing that, so this snaky pattern that you see up here, that's there because the actual grain of the wood moves in that direction. That's the reason that I have it in this upper limb and not in this lower limb, because this lower limb, the grain was very, very straight and parallel. This upper limb, the grain was wavy. And when I draw out my center line for the bow, when I'm doing my layout, what I do is I find where I want the tip, I find where I want the tip on this end, find the center of the bow, and where I have the exact center where the handle's going to be, I take and I follow that wood grain, and I just draw a line right along those wood fibers, and I just follow it all the way up to the tip. And then at that tip, I'll lay off to either side the minimum amount of wood that I need in order to make the knock, because as you can see, the thinner you have the tip, there's less mass at the outer ends of the bow, which means that you have less weight that the bow needs to push as it springs back, which makes for a faster shooting bow. So in essence, you really want their tips to be as narrow as they possibly can and still securely hold the string. Now, in terms of dealing with things like propeller twist works out okay so long as it's compensated. And so if you have propeller twist that's uncompensated, you have to do something, for instance, like take the bow, put it in your steamer, however you do that. You can find on YouTube, there's all different ways that you can use heat, steam to, you can use dry heat as well using a heat gun, but use either steam or dry heat to get the wood pliable enough to where you can bend it. And you take it and you very, very, very carefully bend that wood in the opposite direction so that those fibers get a little bit past, so they retain that memory after the wood is cooled down and you've taken that propeller twist out. If it's perfectly compensated for and balanced on both sides, then you don't need to worry about it because it cancels out dead center, so it's not a problem. If you have it where it's just curved twist, that ends up creating a really funny shaped bow where your bow is almost like bow-legged, where you're holding it at an angle and it shoots funny. I have one bow that was made that way that works out very well, but it's a very unique bow, and I wouldn't expect most people to get lucky like I did with that one. Some other things about character bow layout. Everyone's going to be different. This stave here, this is an Osage stave. You can see it's really twisty and bendy. You can see that it dried with a lot of deflex in it. So the limbs dried pointed upwards like this. This won't stay in the bow. If I try to turn this into a recurve, this is all going to end up bending out, because when I harvested the stave, you know, it was a relatively straight stave. So some of this might stay in, some might not. However, when I look at it, I see this limb is canted off this direction, this limb is canted off this direction, and then it switches up here. This limb kind of switches up here. And where's the center line of this bow going to end up? I won't actually know that until I have the bow fairly close to being tillered to standard brace height, because with this amount of reflex, or whatever you want to call it, built back into the bow, strange things are going to happen when this bow starts bending. This is a very, very, very challenging stave to make a good bow from. It will make a good bow, but only if I'm patient and only if I'm really paying close attention to how I'm managing all these different things. One trick that I may have to use with this bow, and it's the reason why I've shaped the handle the way I have, where it's deep and narrow, is that if the string's not running in the center, like say I get this bow bending well, and instead of having the string lining up with the center of the handle, it's coming off like maybe 2 inches or so up this direction or the other, what I can do is I can heat the center handle part using steam, get it in a vise, and then I can just bend it. And that bend will allow me to get that handle and get that string line back to center again. There's risks involved with that. There's risks always involved when you're making character bows. They're the most challenging bows to make because there's things that you're having to deal with and compensate for. A standard bow, you draw, the layout's really simple. You find the center line, you essentially end up drawing a straight line out. You still follow the grain, but it's going to be straight because the wood is a standard piece of wood. You measure your 1.5 inches, 2 inches out at the end of the handle. Then you measure your 1/2 inch or whatever it's going to be at the tip. You find a yardstick or something. You make a straight line between those two. You figure out how thick you want to make your belly, and maybe you can see it on this, maybe you can't, but I've got a marker line that I went and followed along the back. You make that line. You take off that wood. You get them trimmed off at the sides. Leave a little bit on the belly just for playing with, but if you make the bow that way, it's already probably 80% done, because your standard triangle taper is going to almost tiller the bow for you in a sense without any issues. The only thing that you'll have to take into account is maybe any slight different densities in the wood or some inaccuracies in the way that you have made the thickness of the bow, and you'll just have to clean those up some, and it'll be a very, very simple to make bow. Anything could happen with this stave. Another thing to point out too is that even amongst the same types of bow wood for a character bow, they're going to be very different. These are both Osage orange staves. One's twice as dark as the other. They're both the same age. This yellow Osage, even though the stave is larger, weighs less than the smaller one, because this is not really the highest quality Osage in terms of the qualities that you look for in an Osage bow. The color is very light, its density is lower, so that's why I left the limb so wide on this, because it's going to require a wider limb for this bow to function well without taking a lot of backset. This dark Osage is super dense, so I can make a narrower bow from it and it'll still perform well. Now, there's a lot that I have to compensate for with this. We'll see what happens with this bow. I've already made a few mistakes with it, or it may not even be that I've made mistakes. It may just have been that, say for instance, in this area here, actually that is the case. I can see right here. There's a crack that came out from this knot, and we'll see if I'm able to make the bow thick enough and strong enough here in this piece without ending up with a bow that's like a 15 or 20 pound bow. My goal for this piece of Osage was 65 pounds. 65 pounds is one of my favorite draw weights for a bow, and this Osage is more than capable of doing that. But again, there are a lot of cracks in this stave. This is a deadwood Osage. Some woods you can do that. Osage, you can cut a dead tree down and you can go right to the heartwood, and if you can find a piece that is together enough without a lot of cracking in it, you can make a solid bow from that. A wood like elm, like this bow, not possible. Now this is a phenomenal bow. This is a 57-pound draw bow. It has apple arrow rest, wool yarn for the wrapping, red ochre and beeswax for the camouflage on it, which is on both sides. It has beaver for string silencers. Tiller on its excellent shooting bow, but this wood has to be live when you cut it, or the bow will fail. Osage, you can take a 300-year-old fence post, and it'll still make a serviceable bow. Now, if you have any questions about any specific character bow layouts that you're having problems with, I may be able to answer them, I may not. I would recommend getting the Traditional Bowyer's Bible. Volumes 1 through 4, they cover all this stuff. The Volume 4 is the one that has the character bow layout. It's the book that I bought when I first started learning to make bows. And I'm very glad that I started with that one and just went through YouTube to learn the basics about other things, because that book has, it accelerated my bow making progress to light speed. Really phenomenal book. I don't get anything from saying that. It's just that's the book that I use. That's the one that I find the best and most informative. So yeah, any questions, write them in the comments, and happy bow making.